The shooting death of Michigan State Police Trooper Kevin Marshall left a lot of questions. He was part of a tactical team, specially trained to succeed under fire and to stay safe. Yet he died during the entry of this house outside Fremont. He was trying to arrest the resident, Scott Woodring, wanted on a warrant. Woodring was armed and refused to come out. At the time, targeted investigators wondered what happened in that house. Why didn't all of the tactical planning, procedures, and equipment prevent the tragedy? It's of interest to all of us. Trooper Marshall died while working for us, the citizens of Michigan. To find out, targeted investigators used the Freedom of Information Act to get hundreds of pages of police reports, videotapes, and photographs. This is the story they tell. Trooper Marshall was the lead man of a tight formation, similar to this one videotaped during a training exercise. Trooper Marshall was carrying a heavy shield. It was dark, smoky from tear gas and stun grenades. Only the first 4 made it inside when the shooting started. It was over in a few confusing seconds. The second trooper, right behind Marshall, said they got 10 feet inside the house when they took rapid rifle fire from somewhere inside the house, ahead of the team. He fired 1 shot in that direction, and his gun jammed. The third man in said he was behind and slightly to the right of the first 2 when he heard heavy, rapid, and very loud gunfire from up ahead and slightly to their right, and fired a burst from his handgun in that direction. Then he heard someone shout that the suspect was shooting up through the floor, so he fired a burst down through the floor. So did the 4th man, who had barely gotten inside the back door. He stepped back outside and fired 2 bursts through the wall into the basement stairwell. They never saw where the shots were coming from. During this exchange, as they were backing out, Trooper Marshall was shot. The other officers say that Marshall, still holding his shield, pivoted to the right and fell to the floor. An autopsy done by Spectrum Health pathologist Dr. Stephen Cole found that he was shot 4 times.
The most important 2 wounds were in the back.
Which raised the question, could he have been hit by fire from one of his own team members behind him? If the trooper's statements are accurate, probably not. One trooper's gun jammed, another was barely inside the door. The only team member who might have hit Trooper Marshall would have been the 3rd man in, and he says he did fire a burst forward into the house. But he was using a handgun, so the nature of Trooper Marshall's wounds pretty much rule him out.
If I had no other history, certainly I would say these are all consistent with a high-powered rifle, assault rifle or hunting rifle.
So how then did he get shot in the back? The shield Trooper Marshall carried took several hits from the front, indicating that the gunfire was coming from ahead of the team rather than from the basement, as some team members believed for a while. One bullet hit Marshall's right hand, perhaps as he was reaching around his shield to return fire. One investigator wrote in his report that he believes that turned Marshall around, exposing his back to the gunfire. He was wearing body armor, but it failed to protect him from 2 shots to the back. Gunshot number 2 penetrated the armor and entered his upper back.
Gunshot wound number 3 did pass through, as I recall from that day, a cloth portion of the body armor.
A disturbing fact that raises questions about whether the state police tactical teams have adequate equipment. State police officials wouldn't say whether or not they've done anything about it. They wouldn't answer any questions for this series of reports. And the hundreds of pages of documents we got don't answer another question. Why did police commanders choose to send in the tactical team after a standoff only 18 hours old? At that time, they said.
There had been some indications as we were talking with him at the time that it may have been a moment when we would have had an opportunity to get inside the house and effect an arrest. And that's why we chose that time.
But the entry team was disadvantaged by terrible conditions, poor visibility from smoke and dust, and the gas masks they needed. A suspect ready to fight despite the tear gas and stun grenades. They were ambushed. The official state police after-action report devotes space to the decision to enter residence, but the department won't share that information. All information about that decision is whited out in the copy the state police sent us. The murder of Trooper Marshall wasn't the only thing that went wrong. Tonight at 11, new information about how the suspect escaped a few hours later. And then tomorrow, we'll examine the final showdown, a surprising revelation, plus how the deaths of both men could have been prevented. I'm Target 8 investigator Henry Erb.
All of a sudden he popped up in the cornfield.
Kevin Lukes and his brother Jeff saw the man in dark clothing as they stood here in the gathering twilight last July 7th, watching the siege of Scott Woodring's house across the field. At the time, state troopers and county deputies had the place surrounded with a double ring of tactical officers and snipers.
We just thought it was one of the sharpshooters that were standing there, and he started just itching his way across the fields.
He'd go across and stop, get back up, move a little bit further and stop, move a little further, and everybody else was doing the same thing pretty much that he was doing.
The man was carrying a rifle and dragging a bag as he crawled through the knee-high corn.
Got out in the open hayfield there, and I said to my brother Jeff there, I says, man, he says, that guy moves a little bit like Scott does. Just jokingly, you know.
But in fact, they were witnessing the escape of Scott Woodring. It was an embarrassment for the state police, who just hours earlier lost one of their own men to gunfire inside the house. Now, from police reports and other information, Target 8 investigators have uncovered some answers about how they let murder suspect Woodring get away. It wasn't until late the next day, after the house burned down, that state police commanders admitted Woodring had escaped. They searched the debris and didn't find him. At the time, this is what they told the public.
At this point, we have no idea when or how he exited that building.
But in fact, they should have had a pretty good idea. 2 Newaygo County Sheriff's deputies, working the outer ring of surveillance, saw Woodring leave. At around 8:40 p.m., they saw him walking on the north side of his house and disappear from their view. They called it into the command post, and then, for too long a time, nothing happened.
Was lack of communication.
Newaygo County Sheriff Mike Mercer says the state police team watching the house was on one radio frequency. His team of county deputies watching their backs was on a different radio frequency. That wasn't all.
There was confusion about where exactly the sighting was in relationship to the house.
That's because the two teams, in effect, spoke different languages. They used different code words to identify such things as directions and sides of the house.
That created at least a 5 or 10 minute delay, to my knowledge.
A state police report notes that they did call in a helicopter to take a look, but that this came from the command post with a reported time delay of 10 to 15 minutes. They also sent in the light armored vehicle, but both searched just around the house. By then it was too late. Woodring was gone. Worse, the state police officials, who had just taken over command from the county sheriff, behaved as if the deputy sighting had never happened. They didn't go out into the countryside looking for Woodring. Instead, they continued the siege of his house, the next day planning to tear it down if they had to. Explosives they tossed in burned it down instead. And only after searching the ashes did they conclude that Woodring had escaped. Why didn't state police commanders take the county deputy's report seriously? The state police after-action report says the helicopter observer saw a man at a nearby house wearing similar clothing. The assumption was made that this was the same person that the deputies saw, and it wasn't Woodring. The after-action report blames incorrect assumptions, poor communication, and the fact that the state police team didn't have a complete view of the house. There may have been something else at work here, an attitude that the departments were separate, a sense that our guys are our guys and the others are not quite. It may have been one factor in why the state police failed to act on the county deputy's report. Do you think that if the sighting had been made by one of their guys, that they would have taken it more seriously?
That's possible. That's possible.
They even had separate command posts. The sheriff's department, when it was in charge, set up in this trailer. When the state police came in to help, they set up their own command post in a farmhouse. But that may not happen again.
So the trigger is when this guy comes out to hide, then we're going to take down this and this at the same time.
State police and the tactical teams from several West Michigan sheriff's departments are now training together to try to eliminate the breakdown that allowed Woodring to escape.
We're all embarrassed by the fact that Mr. Woodring did in fact get out of the house.
I'm Target 8 investigator Henry Earp.
Anyone took that information that they were getting, I really can't answer to. The only thing I do know is that there was.
This videotape was shot from a state police helicopter a few hours after a tactical team killed murder suspect Scott Woodring. Woodring's body is just a few feet from the small white utility vehicle they caught him in. They'd been searching for him for a week after the murder of one of their own. It was just getting light when the tactical team rolled up in 4 cars behind the car in which Woodring was sleeping. From the officers' written reports and transcripts of their tape-recorded interviews with detectives, it appears the officers took up positions something like this, using their cars as cover, facing Woodring's car. A couple of the reports say that Woodring got out of the car something like this and then reached down and picked up a rifle from the floor and raised it, pointing it in the direction of the officers who were now facing him. One report says that he even got the rifle up close to eye level before 5 officers opened fire with combat weapons and shotguns. At the time, a state police spokesman summed it up this way.
ES team members ordered Woodring to remain in the vehicle, but despite these instructions, Woodring exited the vehicle armed with an assault rifle and turned toward the officers. Woodring was subsequently shot.
But he was not shot when he was facing them.
Pathologist Stephen Cole's autopsy appears to contradict the police account of what happened. He found 32 apparent wounds.
So in my opinion, the vast majority, if not all, of the gunshot wounds and buckshot wounds entered the back of his body, either the back of the head or the upper portion of his back.
So the obvious question, if, as the officers report, Woodring was pointing a gun at them when they opened fire, how did they shoot him in the back? None of the reports say anything about Woodring suddenly turning. The answer might be that Woodring never did turn towards them. One of the officers told the detective right after the Woodring shooting that he was starting to turn toward us. I don't know whether he was going to come all the way toward us or take off running. It was at that time that we opened up fire. The detective asked, "Do you know if he pointed the weapon at anybody?" The answer, "I don't think he got that far around." Dr. Cole says that statement is more consistent with the medical evidence, but still doesn't fit what he found.
If he was holding a weapon in his hand, maybe it was anticipated that it would soon be pointed at the officers.
And if that were the case, would the police still have had the right to shoot? The Newaygo County prosecutor declared the shooting justifiable, but didn't give details or interviews. So with the new information, Target 8 investigators went to former United States Attorney John Smetanka for answers.
I would look at this and be concerned about the differences in observations by the officers.
He says the accounts are consistent in one thing, that Woodring had a gun, and he says that's important to judging police conduct according to a standard the Supreme Court has provided.
Take all the factors, look at them, and what would a reasonable police officer do under the circumstances?
In this case, the officers believed Woodring had already killed a state trooper. He was wanted for murder. He was ignoring their commands to stay in the car. And if he was holding a gun, or was even reaching for one, according to Smetanka, the officers were probably justified in thinking they were in danger, and if so, they had a right to protect themselves.
The fact that he got shot in the back, given all the circumstance of this, is not, in my view, going to have the officers be liable.
Still, members of Woodring's family questioned police conduct.
Why did they have to shoot him 20 or more times? We think that was excessive.
One trooper said in an interview with a detective, "We acted. We weren't going to risk our lives again." I'm Target 8 investigator Henry Erb.
Because this is just such a sad thing. There are two people that should be here that aren't because of bad decisions.
Molly Maynard says she knows Scott Woodring's views were extreme, anti-government, that he had guns and ammunition in his home. She was his sister-in-law, and she's on the Hesperia Village Council. Last July, Hesperia's police chief asked her about Scott Woodring.
He knew that he had some militia training, and he asked me what he would be dealing with.
Woodring had not been violent, but people knew he was touchy, including the police. An officer safety caution about him circulated among some police departments in the year 2000. According to one police report obtained by Target 8 investigators, one officer suggested not talking to Scott unless there is a need.
I really didn't know how he would react. He didn't trust in the court system.
So when an underage girl complained to police that Woodring had propositioned her in the parking lot of a gas station, the Hesperia police chief was wary of approaching him and sought Maynard's advice.
I didn't see any sense in taking the chance, given his views.
She told the chief it would be safer for everyone if they arrested him somewhere other than his home, where he had access to his guns and could hold off the police.
He seemed like he was listening.
Maynard says she suggested they arrest Woodring at the family 4th of July outing, or at the Muskegon Airfair, where Woodring would be helping direct traffic.
I thought to be on the safe side, that was the best alternative.
Several days passed. Maynard says the police chief told her he couldn't find Woodring and thought he was hiding. But she said she'd seen Woodring on his bicycle around town. Then on Sunday night, July 6th, Maynard went to visit her sister and found Woodring at home. Keeping a promise, she called the police chief. But again, she says, she warned against trying to arrest Woodring at his house. However, the chief did send an officer. We don't know why. The chief wouldn't talk to us on the advice of an attorney because there might be a lawsuit. The Hesperia officer got help from a county deputy and a Fremont policeman. One report quotes one of the officers as saying, "It could get ugly." And it did. Woodring ran inside his house, and the deadly standoff was on.
Most of the time, it's okay. It pans out. It's those few times where it doesn't pan out that are the high-profile cases like this, where you step back and think, well, gee, why'd they do that?
Criminal justice professor Terry Fisk says they teach police officers to think about tactics on the most basic level when they are recruits, how to position cars in a traffic stop, how to control people.
Do we specifically train everybody to think tactically all the time in those arrest situations? No, not specific training. It's something that you learn through experience of others.
Fisk indicates experience can also be the problem, even in cases where there's a potential for a violent confrontation.
It's gotten so routine that they lose that cautionary edge sometimes. Why'd they do that? Well, they did it because they've done it so many other times before and nothing's happened.
I think it was bad decisions, and people are human. Humans make mistakes. The smart humans will learn from them. And I hope that in this case, that will happen.
And since this incident, we have, we and I think numerous agencies have revisited their policies and procedures and have made changes.
Newaygo County Sheriff Mike Mercer says police departments, as a result of the Woodring case, are considering alternatives to arresting suspects when they're armed and at home.
If there's any chance of harm or injury to civilians or to our officers, we will take precautions to make sure that we're the ones on the solid ground, and it's done in our time and place.
Mercer says he knows of one recent case in West Michigan where officers knew an extremist had .50 caliber guns and explosives in his home. They arrested him while he was shopping, without trouble.
It just makes sense.
I'm Target 8 Investigator Henry Erb.
Of harm or injury to civilians or to our officers, we will take precautions to make sure that we're the ones on the solid ground.